Good morning and welcome. If you are in Philadelphia or maybe Chicago or Georgia, where some of our speakers today are from, we welcome you on this rainy day, which allows you to easily plug in virtually to learn some great insights on interoperability. Say that 10 times fast. I'm Dean Miller, the president and CEO of PACT, and I want to welcome you to our MedTech series. We, of course, are grateful for our supporters of PACT overall, and specifically this MedTech series. We are sponsored by Baker Tilly, Dwayne Morris, Fox Rothschild, and the Penn Center for Innovation. This event, as you know, is a webcast. You're muted, but you can ask questions. This Run the World platform allows you to do so through the comments box, and we'll monitor throughout to make sure that your questions get answered. The panel is going to go to about 9:35, and immediately following that, you'll have the ability to choose a breakout room, subject-specific roundtables to discuss with your peers, and we'd encourage you to join. They'll be joined by our esteemed panel. So without further ado, let me turn the panel over to Kat Valyi. Kat comes to us from Georgia. She is the president of Strategic Marketing Solutions. Welcome, Kat.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for asking me to moderate this great topic, interoperability. Interoperability has been in the healthcare space for quite some time, and we just haven't quite gotten there, but we're getting closer, and there's a lot of innovation and discussion and opportunity to learn more, and that's what this particular conversation is about. With regards to what I do, I've been in the healthcare space for about 30 years, exclusively in marketing and strategic marketing for medical device companies, marketing a solution, healthcare solution and services and technology companies. So although I'm not an expert in interoperability, I can help guide the conversation with this great team that does have a lot of insight and information. So with that, I think we should hop in. We have a lot to talk about. We have a great set of panelists that are going to touch on interoperability from different perspectives. So let's start with Adam. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hey, Kat. And thanks to my friends at PACT, Dean, Kat, and all the good folks there for inviting me to participate here. It's a topic I'm very passionate about. And excited to talk about. So Adam Dakin, partner with Dreamit Ventures. We're a Philadelphia-based venture fund. We focus on late seed, Series A, health tech, and cyber tech startups. My background is 25 years of startups, which included co-founding 5 companies, CEO of 3, raising venture money for all of them. A couple went pretty well, and a couple did not, and very passionate about helping startups.
Thank you. Aaron.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and thanks for PACT and the team for allowing this conversation to happen. My name is Aaron Goldmuntz. I helped found a health system-led 501c3 nonprofit organization called the Center for Medical Interoperability. We've acted as a centralized lab modeled after other industries to help health system members drive interoperability of medical technologies within their organizations. We've had a physical lab in Nashville, Tennessee, and brought together many leading medical device manufacturers through interoperability testing events and driving standards-based specifications. We're very excited, passionate about this topic, and look forward to talking to you about some of the opportunities today.
Excellent. And
hi, everyone. First, thanks to PACT supporter Scott Frazier for connecting me with the team here. Scott, I see you out there. So hi, hope you're doing well. I started my career in healthcare technology at Epic, and then later on spent some time at the advisory board company, and that took me into the management consulting world before I got the entrepreneurship bug. I'm fortunate to have had a successful exit in the past, and I'm now at a Series A stage company called Virgo, where we serve both the life sciences community as well as the endoscopic caregiving community in gastroenterology and bronchoscopy.
Excellent. So, like I mentioned before, this is a very big topic, and we're not going to solve everything here, but what we decided to do was break it up into 3 core components that I think will guide us through a great conversation. Again, please feel free to add your questions to the chat. We'll try to incorporate them as much as possible, and if not, we can then touch on them when we're in the different breakout rooms. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with interoperability, the meaning and discussion around it. I'm going to share my screen. There's a great slide by Aaron. Aaron's going to start, and then we'll go through and have a little more discussion. Here we go.
Well, as Kat's pulling that up, I'll just start by saying interoperability as a topic can be confusing and has many definitions and perspectives. And it's gotten a lot of attention recently. Even since we were formed, interoperability wasn't as big of a topic as it is today. CMS launched a Promoting Interoperability Initiative. The 21st Century Cures Act was being drafted and is now implemented, and that's raised the level of awareness of interoperability and what it is. I threw a definition up here. There are many definitions of interoperability. This is from HIMSS, the Health and Information Management System Society, and it's broad, right? The ability to share information across devices and applications so they can, cooperatively use data in a coordinated manner. There's also a lot of activity. There's a lot of standards. There's a lot of work. But I think this visual I like to use to help ground the conversation, because if you're a new company and you need to integrate, you either need access to data or you need to share your data. Where does that fit in? I like to start on these different layers of interoperability. And the first one, I think what most people or the most lay people think about interoperability is sharing of medical records between care settings. When I visit a doctor, I would like that care provider to have information about a previous visit or previous encounter with healthcare system. That in and of itself has been a topic and driving factor, and that's kind of this green bar, care between settings. And there's been a lot of work. Regional health information exchanges have been around for some times. And there has been great effort over the last 5 years to start to consolidate that into national networks. There's regional health information opportunities right here in the Philadelphia region through an HIE, and there are I think the one here in Philadelphia is the Health Share Exchange. But those health systems that use, Epic, for example, are part of the Care Equality Trust Interoperability Framework and can share their data across any other Epic system. There's also big national efforts, an organization called Commonwealth Health Alliance that allows many of the other health information record systems to share records. But that's not all of interoperability. We've spent a lot of time in this kind of red bucket. Within the care system itself, there's still a lot of data that's siloed. So think about, I have a medical device that provides care at the bedside. I want that information to be seamlessly integrated with the health records. I also may want other information to be shared between the other many medical modalities around a patient. I might have a clinical application. I might want to extract that data. A lot of this is being done today. A lot of it is done through proprietary point-to-point interfaces. But the seamless flow of data, even within the episode of care, has tremendous value and potential for how you treat a patient and providing the information and tools necessary as care is being provided. And as a startup company, you may want to integrate some of your tool or application into the healthcare environment and into the clinical workflow, that can be very challenging and costly. So interoperability, there's opportunities to both be able to integrate more effectively within health systems and also extract data more effectively. And again, this has been a big topic, and health systems struggle. They have many, many technologies, and they have more and more both needs for sharing data and integrating it. And it's a big task. The other areas I'd like to just point out, some of this is being fueled by the new regulations that we'll talk about in the next section. But a lot of information is now, being collected and available around the person. We have more data on our wearable devices in our homes that provides information that's relevant to our health. More and more medical devices are available in the home and in other care settings. So there's this tremendous amount of data that is not even within the healthcare system. Some of that can be integrated, but it's pretty clunky right now, and it can also overwhelm the healthcare system itself. And there's a lot of innovation around care, around the individual, around the person. And that brings me to the top level, which is the marketplace itself. There's more and more effort to allow the data out of the health system through open application interfaces, through open APIs. That's enabling innovation around patient-directed applications with the increase in cloud and analytics tools and big data. There's so much more that can be done with data. The ability to researchers and innovators to look at real-world data for clinical trials and other areas, and just the massive amount of opportunities to share outside of the healthcare system itself. Obviously, privacy, security, and the ability to appropriately direct and use data is of the utmost importance. But we're entering a world where data is becoming much more available, and there's a lot of interoperability tools that are helping address that. So hopefully that sets a good foundation. And as you are kind of thinking about, I as an innovator or a startup company or somebody that's trying to implement an interoperability tool, you have to think about where you fit in, because there may be very established tools and standards that already exist, or you may be trudging new territory, and then there might be third-party companies that can help you navigate that.
Now, that was a great overview. I think that it would be great to hear from Ian and Adam from their perspective of interoperability from where they're coming in healthcare. So maybe we'll start with you, Ian.
Sure. And thanks for that overview. From my perspective, starting at Epic and now in the startup world, definitely taking a view of this from a few different perspectives. I think initially, I was primarily concerned with providing interoperable solutions within that healthcare setting, right? Through an Epic implementation, you're looking to ensure that the different information systems in place at a given healthcare organization are able to speak with one another to accomplish, at its most basic, a workflow task. And that's simple enough from a value proposition, because the goal is really to ensure that the actors in a care providing setting are able to do what they need to do to the tools that they standardly use, whether that's Epic or a lab system or a path system or otherwise. Now, it gets a little bit trickier when you're a third party coming in and you're interested in acquiring data and then using that, even if it's being used for purposes that I just mentioned. So I think one thing to really think about, and I know Adam talks about this in some of his podcast series, which I would encourage everyone to look at. They're fantastic on interoperability. Is just ensuring to your customer that being a healthcare system in this case, that there is a value proposition to be had by exchanging data with your new third-party application. And I think that's something that startups tend to struggle with, because in the startup world, you're moving very, very quickly, and you have a very clearly defined use case for the data that you seek to acquire. However, all too often, with that speed of velocity and passion for your business and creating something new, it is easy to forget that the value proposition that you have for acquiring that data needs to resonate with the customer, and the ROI needs to be there beyond just the purposes by which you want to use the data. Now, you may derive ROI as a third party from acquiring that data. That ROI may be equally shared or greater for the healthcare system, but in a different way, and that can be okay. However, it needs to be abundantly clear to both parties that this is an elegant dance that's being done here, and it's not a one-way exchange where only one party benefits from that exchange of data. The last thing I'll say on this before passing it off to Adam is, I think these conversations have become a lot more difficult over the last few years, as a lot of the third-party applications that have come online and are entering the marketplace don't necessarily serve a direct acute caregiving need in the care setting through their acquisition of data. Now, they might be a workflow tool that's used to provide patient care in the care setting, and they provide elegant functionality to perform those activities in standard of care. However, by acquisition of data from, let's say, Epic, they're then able to do things in research or life sciences that provide ROI in a different department within the healthcare organization with whom you're integrating, or with different customers altogether. And so when you start talking about, okay, well, where is this data going? How is it being manifested to provide value in the marketplace writ large? You start running into problems, because you have to ensure, again, that the ROI is going in both directions, whether or not that is a financial incentive to the healthcare organization for the sharing of that data, royalties, or sharing in the fruits of that labor. And then those are questions that, of course, can impact your margins and your ability to be successful in scaling your organization from a profitability and revenue generating perspective. So those are things that you need to be aware of when building a business that might require you to integrate with the healthcare system and then use and model that data for a purpose that is analog but not directly akin to that which you're doing in the care space itself on a daily basis.
Awesome. Yeah, no, good commentary, Ian. Thanks for the shout out there. Appreciate it. Yeah, you're referring to the Dreamit doses, which is a series of short videos that my fund puts out. We have about 60 of them now. Dreamit.com if you're interested. And I did a short series on EHR integration. And so some of what I'll say is going to be a little bit redundant, but if you want to dive a little bit deeper on some of these thoughts, go to Dreamit.com where I've got some of these doses. So. Yeah, I mean, I guess the first high level comment is this is super complicated stuff. There's technical complexity, there's strategic complexity, there's tactical complexity. And I think a lot of, there's a reason we talk about interoperability and the EHR as the wood chipper of digital health, right? I mean, it's where great startups go to die. Go to any hospital, you see that long line down the hallway. You know what that is? That's the line in front of the IT department. Right? Get on the back of the line and wait your turn. And even if your integration is simple, you're still going to wait at the end of the line unless someone does you the favor of moving you to the top of the pile. So we find a lot of startup founders just simply don't appreciate the complexity of what's involved here. Almost feel like interoperability should be a new functional area, right? You got marketing, you got sales, you got manufacturing. You know what? You ought to have interoperability. Because trying to stuff it into one of those groups, operations or the R&D department or product development, you really need to ask yourself if you have the resident expertise or are you trying to figure it out on the fly, which probably not the best way to go. And as Ian mentioned, there's a lot of outside resources, third-party integrators. We're an early investor in a company called Redox. They're one of the market leaders in integration. They can make the lift a whole lot lighter, but they're not a just add mix and add water kind of solution. There's still a lot of complexity involved in figuring these things out. And generally, integration is not a lot of the mistake startups may think of integration as a task list item. Like, oh, great, we got a customer, let's integrate. No, if that's the way you're approaching it, you're making a big mistake. You're letting the tail wag the dog. You need to start before that with your overall go-to-market strategy and think about, okay, what's the minimum we need to do to prove value? And that's something that that's a concept called minimal viable integration. And full disclosure, I stole that from Nico Skavansky from Redox, who sort of educated me on this concept of building out a minimalistic approach to integration so you can just prove value. And again, even those can be complicated, but they're a lot less complex. And generally, we're not talking about a full two-way integration from multiple data sources. We're talking about what's the absolute minimum amount of data you need to grab or send to show a customer that this is worth pursuing, that the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak. So thinking about your go-to-market, thinking about how do I get my first customers and what will those customers require for me to prove value is really the kind of, essential for thinking through interoperability. But investors are going to press you. If you're out raising money here, we're going to press you really hard to, what do you actually have a strategy around interoperability? Do you have a thoughtful plan on how you're going to build that out? And do you have the technical expertise? I can't tell you how many founders we've seen faceplant when we really start, they know the APIs, but when you really start pressing them on SOC 2 and high trust and HIPAA compliance, they faceplant and you lose credibility. Same thing's going to happen when you're talking to customers if you don't have resident expertise in these areas.
That was I like that whole thought process of having a new functional area that's focused on interoperability, because it is so specific. We did have a question come up that I'd like to share, and perhaps we can go round robin with regards to answering it. It says, could you share more about the role of an interoperable solution like Care Everywhere or Commonwealth, and where I should expect their role to start and stop to best prepare my healthcare organization to accept and send data? Does anybody want to?
Well, yeah, I can start. On the graphic, those solutions are squarely in sharing data between care providers. So, I guess you said Care Everywhere. Care Everywhere is actually a tool for Epic itself. Care Equality is a framework was originally sponsored by Epic and many other health information exchanges. But those tools are facilitating sharing traditional CCA documents based on a IHE standard for sharing a record between one caregiver to another caregiver, hopefully so when you walk into a new care environment that they can go and grab records from a previous encounter. There are some limitations. I don't want to delve into the next topic too much, but that area is also being addressed by a provision of the 21st Century Cures law called the TEFCA, or Trust Exchange Framework and Common Agreement, that the goal of that is a single on-ramp for sharing. So you have these national networks that exist. You have a lot of local health information exchanges. The goal of that legislation is to create a single on-ramp for sharing it. Interestingly, that problem's largely been solved because those national networks work together pretty well right now. But they put in this legislation, they put in place a whole infrastructure, and they have now a common agreement. No one's adopted it yet, and some of those existing frameworks and networks may morph to this new model, but they haven't done that. It's also not mandatory. It's a voluntary approach. I don't know if that helped, but depending on what your solution is, and if your data set could be folded into those, it can be a really impactful way for you to make sure you're sharing some of that data. But it is a limited data set, and it's over an existing framework, so that's where those specific solutions start and stop. So
Yeah, you should probably think of those as tools in your toolkit. And what are the specific needs of your company given the stage that you're at, and then match that with those different platforms that provide different data feeds. So if you need an asynchronous data feed, maybe an HIE or an HSE where, you're getting a data dump every night, but it's updated in 24 hours, that might be perfectly fine for you. On the other hand, if you're doing real-time clinical decision support by the bedside, guess what? You can't wait till tomorrow to get the data. You got to get the doc the information when the doc is standing in front of the patient. That's a different, that's a deeper integration in real time with the EHR. So you're getting real time patient data. There's many different, we have companies that start up like, hey, we're just going to show you value. We don't need any integration. Just send us a data dump. Send us a bunch of data files over, and we'll show you that if you had our platform, this is what how we could have impacted you. No integration at all. Great way to show retrospective analysis of if we'd had your data and you would have made these decisions or had this information. So those are all different ways to get data. You have to think through what level of integration you need, what data you need, is it synchronous, asynchronous, and then go out and kind of shop for the right platform to solve those particular, the needs that you have, that your customers have right now.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I heard care everywhere. So I'm thinking maybe you're from a healthcare system that's using Epic. So if that's the case, then with care everywhere, that's a relatively, and again, to harken back to what Adam said, not to oversimplify this, but in the grand scheme of things, a relatively turnkey solution as compared to integrating with a net new third party disconnected from Epic, given that is an Epic to Epic feature. Now, share everywhere, which would allow you to exchange data between Epic and Cerner, for example, would be a bigger lift. Now, from the startup perspective, I couldn't agree more with what was just said about data dumping versus real-time interfacing. I think it's important to really think about in developing that strategy. How do we get to a place where we're sprinting? You can never sprint for too long if you're never even walking, right? So walk before you run a little bit. Sometimes, what we'll do at Virgo is actually provide both options to customers. We'll say we have a canned reporting option on a predefined interval, as well as a real-time interface option. And now if they so choose to go with the former, that allows us to build trust with that customer. And to Adam's point, demonstrate the efficacy of that data exchange in real time. Moreover, if you're a startup and you're trying to evaluate the efficacy of a real-time integration in your own right, oftentimes, not only do you need a minimum viable integration, you need a minimum viable pilot partner. In order to acquire this data successfully, you need to have a provider partner that is willing to work with you, knowing full well where you are at in your development stage. That can not only be expensive, but it can put at risk your long-term scalability, because integrations may be one place where startups go to die, but pilot projects are surely where almost all of them go to die. So the importance of building that trusted relationship with core early adopters as you're looking at that adoption curve. We all get really excited in the early days of the startup world. You're selling, and all of a sudden you get these big name shops on your logo board, only to realize that, they're all classic pioneering early adopters. Now, when you start getting into the trough of that adoption curve, you need to have done the hard work with those pioneers to ensure that you have your strategy very well defined, so you can rattle it off with utter confidence, quite frankly, when you're working with the kind of more de rigueur providers that aren't typically adopting new technologies as quickly as some of those vanguard institutions. And so I think it's a good idea to, even though, especially in the startup world, we might think of data dumping or SFTPs as like, really? We were doing that in the 80s and 90s? Are we still doing that? It works. We still use number 2 pencils. It works, and it will give you an opportunity to accelerate your own ability internally at your startup to model that data as well. If you don't feel like you have that subject matter expertise of an industry veteran with 5, 10 plus, 15 plus years of experience on your roster, and you're recruiting that person, but you want to start understanding what you need from a health system, getting data dumped to you in a canned fashion securely allows you to at least ensure that your data model that you're putting in front of customers is correct. Because the last thing you want to do is turn around a month later after you've put in place a report or integration and say, actually, we asked for all of the wrong data in the wrong format. We didn't know what we were doing. So having an ability to actually work with a substantive data set, model that, get to a point of sophistication that is savory to both your needs as well as the value it provides to the customer is a really critical element before sitting down or, bringing your sandwich from home and getting in line at the IT office and hoping for a meeting. So definitely the power is in the preparation.
There was a point you raised in there that I think is important, Ian, that it was kind of buried in there, but I think there's a gem in there around these pilots. Yeah, you're 100% correct, right? Pilots, death by pilot is kind of the nomenclature, right, in the industry. And for the startups out there, we advise our startups the pilot is the word, it's the word that shall not be spoken, right? It's like Voldemort from Harry Potter. And the reason is because you want to create the expectation with your customers that you're not a test pilot. You're not going out to see if the plane flies. You have a product and you want them to purchase it. So we prefer to use trial to purchase. That creates an expectation in the customer's mind, like, oh, there's an expectation that if this works, we're actually going to buy it. And that means you have to define success ahead of time. And you have to understand what the budget availability is ahead of time. So that, what Ian's getting at is there's hundreds of stories of companies that have had successful pilot startups, but it never converts to a commercial contract because the budget was actually never available. The right decision makers were actually never on board. The endpoints, the clear endpoints of success weren't bought in by the entire stakeholder network that's going to have to approve the purchase, which can sometimes be 20, 30 people in a large academic medical center, right? So those are the things that as a startup, to sort of avoid this death by pilot, you want to have clear definitions ahead of time and an understanding of what do we have to do to actually turn this into a commercial contract, right? Have they agreed with your pricing? Like, the pilot was awesome. Wait, $50 per member per month? We ain't paying that. Thanks for coming.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's important for all the parties to have skin in the game too, right? I think statistically it's easy to find a lot of good data that suggests in pilot periods the end users aren't quite motivated to even use the product necessarily because, it's just a free thing that my boss told me that I have access to for a certain period of time. And, I might check it out when I have a little bit of time on my hands. What physician or caregiver has a little bit of time on their hands? So it's important for both parties to have skin in the game. And, we've done something similar at Virgo where we call it an initial use period. And what that really means is we go through the entire procurement cycle and customer purchases the product, an annual subscription to the product, and we grant them a ripcord. So within 6 months of implementation, if they don't want to move forward, we keep that check in escrow. And if they pull the ripcord 6 months in, they get all their money back. But if they don't let us know that they want to call it a day on that contract within 6 months, it rolls over to that annual contract and they've already purchased it. We've already gone through procurement and met with those steering committee members. Now, the healthcare life cycle and sales cycle takes a really, really long time. So maybe if you're looking for your very first customer or a partner that you have in mind that could be a great development agent for you, perhaps going Adam's route is actually better in the early days because it allows you to get your product in the ground a little bit faster. However, we've found a lot of success with ensuring that there is that true, to Adam's point, understanding of the gravity, the price point, and getting all the necessary decision makers to the table to have eyes on your product and actually use it and not feel like they just, it's ours now. This company gave it to us and they're never going to pull it out. Definitely good points raised.
Yeah. We have a question from a slightly different perspective that I thought I'd share, and then we can see if we can answer. It says, as a medical device company that collects medication adherence data, can you talk about the pros and cons of partnering with an RPM platform company versus a self-monitored RPM management with respect to reimbursement codes ROI? Who would get paid the reimbursement? So I don't know how deep you can get, but maybe there's some insight we can share.
Well, so our obviously acronyms here, but RPM, remote patient monitoring. This is a fundamental shift in trend in reimbursement for some. It's actually from a healthcare. I'll just first say broadly from healthcare. A lot of care is moving outside of the traditional borders of care. And we've had a lot happen in the last 2 years, especially fueled partially by the pandemic, where telemedicine, remote patient monitoring, even hospital at home has been reimbursed in ways that it has never been reimbursed in the past. And again, I didn't fully capture the question, but there is reimbursement for remote patient monitoring, for example, following chronic condition patients, that a care provider can get for monitoring certain increments of time. The challenge with that is making sure that that somebody's doing the physical monitoring and looking at the data, and that's how those codes work. So I think the question was, who do I work with if I've got a technology or solution or monitoring solution? And there are companies that help manage the portal and integration, and of course connectivity and integration, especially with things at the home. There are different tools for hubs to collect data, but then integrating it to make sure that it then gets back to a physician workflow and somebody or clinical workflow to help with that. There's a lot of companies in that space. It's pretty exciting. So I think there are a couple different integration points. But if you just are collecting the data, the question is, where do you send it and how? I think either working with somebody that's helping manage that data and present it will help. It's the clinic that will get, or the care provider that will get reimbursed. And so there's a couple of different business models in terms of how that's enabled and shared with the technology vendors.
Yeah, I might tackle that even from great points, Aaron, but from a higher level, I think in that question was this question around partnering with another company that might help you enable or enables your solution. And I guess the thing to be wary of, one, for startups, partnering with other startups is really hard. Like be afraid, right? Because it's hard enough to get your business off the ground and stay focused on what you need to do. And we see this all the time where two startups are like, hey, we're peanut butter and jelly, let's work together. Let's co-market, It really does sound good theoretically, but at a very practical level, it just it takes away focus from your core business. And in that question, like, oh, how do we revenue share? And who generated the lead? And all these questions start to come up very on a practical level that just makes it really hard for startups to work together. And then startups partnering with big companies has a whole different set of challenges, because you're just not going to be a priority for them, right? So again, like, head down, focus on proving the value of your platform, get into the market, get some commercialization proof points. And it's so easy to get tempted by these conversations when, a big multinational starts whispering in your ear and says, oh, we want to do a co-development, or we want to invest, or, we want a co-marketing deal. Just be very careful, because most of those deals in reality don't work out, and they serve to be huge distractions of time and money. And in that, embedded in that question there, I think you sort of also have to ask yourself, are you the pickaxe and you're selling it to the miners here? Are you, hey, we're the medication adherence piece of an RPM platform. We're going to go to all the RPM companies and say, hey, if you want medication adherence, we're the guys. That's a very different strategy than, oh, we can't do this without RPM. We need somebody's RPM. Let's go shopping. And so those are very different kinds of strategies and relationships that have to be thought through.
That was good. Okay. I like that. I think we can, with interoperability, regulatory issues or trends are very important with moving along and getting toward total interoperability. We have another great slide to share. Developed by Aaron, and he's going to start by going through some of what's happening in the 21st Century Cures Act, as I believe that, and we all believe that these are going to be impactful and help take us where we need to go, and then the rest of the gentlemen can follow. So,
Well, full disclosure here, this is not my slide. This is from the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology. There's a link on the bottom, or healthit.gov. There's a lot of information there. It just seems relevant to this conversation just to share a quick update, and we don't have to dive into too much detail on this, but you may have heard of it. It's 21st Century Cures Act. It was actually signed into law on December 13th, 2016. And it's just starting to be implemented and enforced. And it has some impacts on some of those dimensions that I mentioned. So the three main areas relative to interoperability for the 21st Century Cures Act are preventing information blocking, meaning I am required now by law that I can't purposely share or block information from being shared, with the patient for the benefit and treatment of care and for other appropriate purposes. And also that we're going to enable a greater access to information by opening up and making it part of our certification program for opening up open APIs, application programming interfaces that allow the sharing of data with third-party applications, patient-directed. The third part, which I talked about briefly, which is helping share between care settings, which is the TEFCA, or Trust Information Framework and Common Agreement. That's not on this slide, and as I said, that the first part of that was just published. The Common Agreement was published in January of this year. But and you can see a timeline here. This is the timeline from ONC. There are two pretty important elements that are coming up this year, and so I'm just going to highlight those. And one is on the information blocking provision. So this actually went into effect about 1 year ago in 2021, where the mechanism for this is that you can go and report instances where you see information blocking happening, meaning and they have a website that's live now. You can go in and implement those. The enforcement mechanisms for this are potentially twofold. One is that they're going to publish those that are doing information blocking, so it's a public shaming type of a mechanism. And then the other one is this potential for monetary damages. It's important to note that the ONC was doing the tools, they're doing the regulations for this, but there still has been no activity, which would be from a different department, the Office of the Inspector General, to do any kind of monetary penalties. We don't know if those are going to happen or what those will look like yet. But the ability to report exists today, but it's only for a limited data set, what's called the USCDI. And that is a limited set of terms and tools. It's typically what's used in sharing records between healthcare systems. But the interesting data on the bottom here is, if you look on the bottom, I don't know if you see well, maybe you don't see my cursor, but on the bottom right corner, on November 6, 2022, the definition of information that cannot be blocked is broader than that limited USCDI data set, and it's a new definition called electronic health information, which is a very broad definition, and it includes kind of everything within the clinical record, including clinical notes. That goes into effect again later this year. The other interest, just to note too, there are a number of exceptions to information blocking. I think there's 8 categories of exceptions. So even though information shall not be blocked, there's several provisions that, in certain circumstances, there are exceptions. And we could go into those in detail, but a lot of that information is available at healthit.gov. The other interesting point of something that's coming up is in that category I showed before. It both the marketplace and also the the person. This open API, which is based on health HL7 FHIR Fast Health Interoperability Resources version 4. Those APIs have to be available by the end of this year. Many EMR systems have already made those available, but it's required by certification of HIT systems. So certification of your EMRs, you're required to expose these APIs. That's great for companies that are developing tools or applications that want to pull that data, because in the US, across the country, any certified health IT system, you should be able to utilize and take advantage of those exposed APIs. And so these are things that are happening today that is a result of that law. There's some I think it's really good momentum in some areas. I'll also point out that it doesn't solve all the problems, right? So those exposed APIs, for example, are a one-way pull of data out of the EMR system. It's not bidirectional. The other piece is it doesn't push anything back. So it doesn't so it's one directional, doesn't push anything back. The other interesting piece, sorry, I was saying the same comment there twice. The other interesting piece is because it's a patient-directed patient-directed pull of data out. Once that data has been pulled out by that individual, it's no longer protected by HIPAA. So HIPAA governs information within the health system and with their covered entities, or those that have business associate relationships with the health system. So we're also entering a brand new world of as data gets pulled out, then who and how is that governed? And you have to really trust those that you're allowing to and giving permission to provide access to your health information. I'll pause there. Again, this is not meant to be. I'm not for moments human. I'm not an expert on this. But there's a lot more information from the federal government. I'll also note that there's open API requirements for payors to share data as well. That have already gone in place. So this is a broader law than just this, but it does have implications for interoperability, and has a lot of implications for how you might want to take advantage of these things.
Yeah, I mean, you, Aaron and Ian, you guys may have more expertise here, but I think one of the points you raised, which is really important, is that it's just really about pulling data out. And a lot of our startups, right, like let's use an example, clinical decision support, again, by the bedside, where the doc's going to be in the EHR, Epic or Cerner typically, right? They're the dominant players. That law doesn't do anything to sort of make Epic be a better citizen in terms of making it easier for the startup or third parties to push data back into the system, which most of our startups, especially if you're a real-time clinical tool, you got to get back into the EHR. You have to be within the clinician's workflow. So if they have to go to it, oh, great. Well, we don't have to be in the EHR. We'll just create a separate portal. Well, that's a showstopper, non-starter. No one's going to take the extra time to go to your separate portal when they're trying, they're working 12-hour days. They're already plenty stressed out. That's a kind of a hokey workaround that we see a lot of startups say, oh, well, just click into our portal. Yeah, that's not so good. But unfortunately, there's a lot of enthusiasm around 21st century cures, and it is helping get the data out. But it doesn't make the Epics and the Cerners of the world need to help you get the data in. And even if you get in, right, typically you need a user interface, right? You have to show up somewhere in the record, whether it's a button or a cell or a field that you need to get into. Well, they don't have to cooperate. They don't have to make it easy for you to create that field. So there's there's a lot more work to be done here in terms of the, regulation on pushing data back in. And then, the problem is, right, that the EHR vendors can always fall back on, well, this is a security issue. We can't just let anybody put data into the EHR. I mean, terrorists are going to get the information and charge your hospital millions of dollars. So, like the FDA can always fall back on safety concerns to not give you an approval. The big EHR companies can always fall back on security to make life difficult for companies that want to push data into the EHR.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think the thing that really came to mind here is, and all this is from a tough experience on the ground, like trying to solve these problems. And what we find and is relatively consistent is just to echo these points. Although these laws surface and force the availability of this information, availability doesn't mean easy. And your Epics and your Cerners of the world and some other companies have done a good marketing push around their developer programs that you can join, and so you can better understand how in which you can surface your field within their EHRs. Now, the smaller the market share of the EHR provider, this is where problems can come in, especially as we're entering into a world where real-world evidence collection is incredibly important outside of the standard of caregiving spectrum. And a lot of that data that folks want is coming from the private practice and community-based care settings where they aren't necessarily using Epic or Cerner. So the smaller the market share of the EHR provider, the smaller the footprint of the healthcare provider using that system, the less easy it is for you to get your hands on the data in that EHR for a few reasons. One, those companies are more resistant to opening up their tunnels and their pipes. They're charging their provider customers an arm and a leg for the professional services required to build those integrations on their behalf, because a private practice doesn't have an HL7 developer on staff there. So as a startup, are you going to pay for that resource? Who are you paying? Someone's getting paid for you to get that data at the end of the day, because you need to help accelerate the process by which you can actually access it. Secondly, I think something to be cognizant of is, to Adam's point, if you're standing up a second portal, you probably still aren't out from underneath an integration. As healthcare providers run towards a zero trust framework, you're going to have to put in an integration around OAuth or single sign-on or Active Directory or two-factor authentication. Those are no easier than implementing an HL7 interface, but they don't serve any business purpose other than securing your platform, which is, of course, of paramount importance. However, it doesn't further your business objectives from a functionality perspective. So you have to be prepared, even in a world where you may stand up a third-party UX, to integrate with their baseline system to some degree to provide that fidelity of security and privacy protection, which is also an expensive enterprise to undertake.
Okay. I think this is a good time to segue into innovation and market trends around interoperability. And we got an interesting question that I thought we could use as a kickoff point and then go into different specific innovations and trends. The question is, with AI becoming a reality, utilizing third-party cloud-based algorithms to help with diagnosing and managing patient care, what are the pitfalls and how should companies plan for this with health IT gatekeepers?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at this in a couple of ways. Well, first, getting back to kind of first principles here is, if you're trying to if you have an algorithm that can either run a loop on data that is existent within the EHR in real time, or you're running an algorithm against a data asset like an image, first, obviously the ROI needs to be there. So you need to be able to longitudinally demonstrate that the effectiveness of that algorithm is better for patient care than it was before that algorithm existed. So you need a ground truth data set that's large. You need to provide that performance over time. Luckily, we have a lot of regulatory bodies in place to help structure those proof points through FDA clearance and regulation therein. Now, I think we're entering into an interesting world where we're starting to see a lot of CAD-E and then a lot of interest in CAD-X, which would be not only the identification of something that we need to address from a caregiving perspective, but the the clinical diagnosis and suggestion of exactly what that thing might be. I mean, in my world, and I saw who asked the question, in the world of GI, the example being, we can identify a polyp in real time, or we can tell you what kind of polyp it is in real time. Now, those are very different things that have incredibly different implications for the potential liabilities involved. When you're trying to tell someone, okay, we see a polyp, however, we're going to also tell you that it is non-cancerous. In 5 years, if those cancer occurrence rates go up or are at baseline, something is very much amiss, because we're in fact telling people that things are not cancerous when they in fact are. So when you think about the gravity of the impact this can have on patient care, and whether or not providers will be willing to take that advice, I think it becomes a really, really interesting paradigm shift. Now, I see a world where the payer community can really help get involved in establishing the validity and proof points of novel technologies like this, because the payer community will have access to radical volumes of data that can very simply demonstrate at the zip code or sub zip code level the impact of a given AI on a given disease state, ICD-10 code or CPT code set. So you're actually able to run some longitudinal analysis in shorter periods of time to determine whether or not your solution is effective and really moving the dial or not. And it's that ground truth that's going to be required to get a lot of these things to market. You won't see radical adoption of you never see radical adoption of a clinical decision-making tool unless it is very proven to not only be safe through like a phase 1 or 2 trial, but also efficacious to patient care in phase 3 and post-market validation. So I think the way in which these apps need to get to market and the way in which the FDA has structured their intake process is a good place to start, where these algorithms are forced to follow a process that is not dissimilar to that which a therapeutic or pharmaceutical, a molecule would have to follow, following a strict regimen of clinical trials. And I think that's the way it should be. But there's definitely room for improvement there. And as a healthcare organization putting those things in market, you need to have the scientific data to back it up when you're talking with gatekeepers in the healthcare community. You need to not only have the data, but you need to have the pedigree of experience to actually be relevant and respectable when bringing these things to market. I'm not a physician, nor is my co-founder. We don't do clinical decision support because we do not have the pedigree to provide those tools. That is not what we're building. We're doing that for a very present and evident reason. We provide a service that allows companies that do produce those tools to build them, because we believe that there are people out there that are more skilled and have the subject matter expertise to get there faster and more effectively than we could, right? So it also requires an ethical decision around, although you might be interested in doing something, are you really the best person to do it?
Awesome.
And just one quick point on that, which might be obvious because I know we got a pretty smart, sophisticated audience, but when Ian mentions the difference between identifying an object of interest and diagnosing an object, a landmark or tissue of interest, that's where you cross a very bright red regulatory line, right? The regulatory hurdle for, doc, take a closer look at this, we're just identifying object of interest, is very different than the regulatory hurdle and requiring for that's malignant, that's not. And so as most startups start as they go to market, like, we're going to get through the FDA with this very benign claim of we identify, pattern recognition or object recognition, which isn't too hard to get through the FDA versus actually making a clinical diagnosis. But one could argue, there's a different value proposition. There's a different, what you're going to be able to charge for an accurate diagnosis versus, hey, you made my job a little bit easier and you made sure I didn't miss a polyp, is very different than, we didn't have to do a biopsy. Totally different value prop.
Yeah, and from a value prop perspective too, I mean, you have to address with the healthcare IT, the gatekeepers, where's the value proposition and the ROI, right? Is there a reimbursement code for AI-assisted colonoscopy, knowing that it's going to slow your physicians down and your unit runs on a certain amount of volume per day? Are you paid more for using that service, or are you just bleeding margin from an OpEx that's already being run down to the penny per scoping event?
Right.
I also want to just chime in here. Health systems are being overwhelmed, and appropriately so, because there's some really cool AI analytics tools, but they're overwhelmed with these requests hey, just give me your data, and then I'm gonna, go run this cool, analytics, and then I'll give it back to you. And I think understandably that can be overwhelming. And some of our members are starting to do things like pull their data into a data lake or data warehouse, so you can expose data requests through that. And so the question is, how, and also many health systems are moving a lot of their data to cloud. Once it's there, there's a lot more opportunities for different integrations with third parties. I think in general, the health systems want to use all these cool tools and take advantage of them, but you can understand they're appropriately concerned about just giving the data, giving access to the data, and that has to be done in a very thoughtful manner. And I think there's a lot of proactive approaches in terms of how you can expose that. There's a lot of things that that are challenges even within their own organizations, contractual relationships they have with their own vendors that oftentimes stimulate or their ability to do some of those things. So we look at a lot of the different dimensions of trust and the dimensions of things that may not be technical and clinical itself. It could be all the other things like their contractual, financial. Darren just mentioned, the regulatory piece, and then all these liability risk dimensions as well.
Yeah, we have about 2 minutes left here, and I'd love to maybe get you all to talk about some quick, innovative things that people should look into or think about in the interoperability space. Maybe start with you, Adam.
Well, I mean, look, there's going to be more and more. I mean, we're seeing it every day, right? More and more of these pickaxes out there to help startups and companies figure out the interoperability, not have to reinvent the wheel every time, sort of approach. So it's getting better. Like I want to make it clear that it's just, like anything in healthcare, everything moves at sort of a glacial pace. It's a regulated industry, and providers understandably are very, are loath to change, right? There's nothing harder in the universe than getting a doctor or a provider to change their behavior, and for good reason. But I guess, to sort of finish on a positive note, it is, interoperability has traditionally been this sort of the wood chipper of digital health, but I do think it is getting better. And I think that startups and founders are getting smarter in how they think about interoperability. So where I would say in the past, it was almost a show when we look at hundreds of companies a year, and it was such a common faceplant for a startup to not understand interoperability. It does seem that founders are getting a lot more sophisticated and a lot more educated around sort of the requirements and the strategies for doing this stuff. There's a lot more resources available online to educate yourself on this stuff. So I guess I finish with encouraging the founders out there to roll up the sleeves, do the work, go online, and try to become as much as you can, become a subject matter expert, and leverage the consultants out there. A lot of consultants will talk to you for free, by the way. They want a relationship with you. They'll do that first conversation. I know Redox, for example, they'll do the first conversation with you at no charge. So take advantage of those kinds of resources.
Okay. Adam, any thoughts?
You mean Ian or Aaron?
Oh, Aaron. I was looking at Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked a lot about this already. There's a lot of interesting areas of innovation. I also, just coming from a lot of the work we've done, I think there's also this belief that it's all about the EMR and that's the linchpin of the health system. There's still a lot of data that's trapped that can be extremely valuable in medical devices and other systems that has huge potential for some opportunities, and that's a lot of the work that we've done. And I think I agree with Adam. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of resources. There's There's a lot of innovative companies that are helping others navigate this, in this space. But I would go back to kind of where we started, which is, what are your interoperability needs, and trying to navigate what you're actually trying to share and how you're trying to share it, and those will point you to the right resources and tools. Some of them that are pretty mature, and others I think are still kind of still the wild west, unfortunately.
Awesome. So it looks like it's time for us to segue into the breakout rooms. We have three great topics and great breakout rooms. The first breakout room is going to be monitored by Ian, and the focus is interoperability beyond patient care, benefits, and challenges. The second breakout room, or breakout room number 2, is with Aaron, and it's practical approaches and mechanisms for connecting with and within the healthcare systems. And finally, we have room number 3, that's going to be for Adam. It's interoperability strategy for startups. So please hop into the room of your choice. I think this is a great opportunity to get some specific questions answered, and then we'll take it from there.